Hey guys, Jordan here. In this video, I'm going to go over 15 real estate photography tips to avoid mistakes. Tip number one, choose the right time. Now, some properties look really well in the morning, some look better at night or in twilight time. You need to know the property and how the sun is setting. Choose a good time to shoot a particular property. Now, a safe time to shoot a property is when the sun is directly above because it's not casting a bunch of light and shadows on the front or back of the property and not a whole lot of light coming in the property. So that's a safe time, but know the property and choose an appropriate time. Tip number two, examine the property beforehand. So it's important to know about the property before you get there, especially if you're doing multiple services. You want to know what you're getting yourself into, as well as kind of get an estimation of how long the services are going to take when you get there. Some properties have unique settings where they might be on 5 or 10 acres where you're going to have to walk around and take different photos, or maybe it's a massive house with huge rooms and it's not going to take you that long even though the property is really, really big. So make sure to take a look at the property and just get an idea of how long the shoot's gonna take so you can set the correct expectation with your customers. It's also important to note that if you're doing aerial photos at a particular property, you wanna make sure it's not located in a no-fly zone. Tip number three, open the blinds. In most cases, open blinds make the property look warm and inviting, sometimes not so much, so there are cases where you should close the windows, especially if you got some really dirty windows or the view outside is of a car or something like that. That might be a turnoff to the property. So in most cases, having open blinds makes the photos look much better because it's allowing more light to come into a room and it just feels warm and inviting. Tip number four, turn on all the lights. Now, before we start shooting our photos, we like to go through the property, turn on all the lights, put the toilet seats down, and just make sure the property is photo ready before we start shooting so that we don't accidentally forget to turn on a light, and that's why we do it beforehand. Tip number five, set your pricing right. Now, it's important to do your homework in your area. How much are real estate agents paying for photography services and what kind of quality and products are they getting from their real estate photographers? And then look at your products and see what kind of service you want to provide. You want to make sure that your pricing is competitive, otherwise you're going to have a hard time getting customers. Tip number six, use a tripod. Now, some photography, you can get away with not using a tripod because your shutter speed is really fast. But in real estate photography, you're usually shooting multiple exposures of every shot. So having a tripod is important so that you're not having camera movement when you're stacking those multiple images during the editing process. Tip number seven, buy a wide angle lens. So for real estate photography, it's important to have a wide angle lens to be able to show the size of rooms. Now, if you're using like a regular kit or zoom lens, it's not going to be wide enough to show what the room has to offer. Tip number eight, find creative angles to shoot. Now, it is important to get your standard shots, but every property is different, so look for things that are going to add value to your customers, whether that's mountain view shots. It is also important to ask your customers if there's anything specific that they want you to focus on. Tip number nine, set proper camera settings. Now, this one sometimes can be overlooked. If you're not paying attention, you might have a setting from a previous shoot, or maybe you're doing video and your ISO settings are much higher than shooting photography. So you want to make sure that your camera settings are appropriate for what you're shooting at that time. And this leads me to tip number 10, which is take care of your ISO settings. Now, this is one of the most important settings in your camera for real estate photography because a lot of times we're getting details out of the highlights and we're boosting shadows. And if you're dealing with high ISO settings on photography, a lot of times it's going to introduce a lot of noise and it's just going to make your image quality go down dramatically. So make sure to set an appropriate ISO setting when shooting real estate photography. Tip number 11, fix your white balance. Now, you don't necessarily have to shoot the most perfect white balance at a property when you're shooting raw because you can adjust it during the editing process, but it is important to make sure that it is fixed before you deliver it to your customers. The last thing you want to do is deliver some yellow or blue photos that don't look like the property. The goal is to deliver photos that look like the property did when you were shooting it. Tip number 12, fix your lens distortion. The last thing you want to send over to your customers to use is a bunch of photos that have distortion on the ends, which makes the lines look bowed. Because you're using a wide angle lens, this is common with real estate photography, but the good thing is most editing softwares have a lens correction option, so you want to make sure that that's checked off before sending over the finished photos to your customers. Tip number 13, use the transform tool. Now when you're shooting a property, you may not be perfectly balanced, and that's what the transform tool will help solve. It'll help straighten your lines automatically. Now sometimes the transform tool will act or pick a line and it doesn't work that great, but for 90% of the edits, the transform tool will make it nice and straight. Tip number 14, outsource your photo editing. Now you may be the type that wants to control every aspect of your photos, but I will tell you that for sanity's sake, it's not a bad idea to outsource your photo editing, especially if you're shooting more than 4 to 5 shoots in a day. The last thing you want to do is be shooting all day and then you're going to be editing till 1 or 2 a.m. and then be tired for your shoots the following day. Now, if you're shooting 1 or 2, you're fine doing your own edits, but in my opinion, for long-term sustainable success, I would recommend outsourcing your photo editing. And finally, tip number 15, shoot in file format RAW. Shooting in RAW will give you ultimate flexibility during the editing process and will definitely help you to deliver better, higher quality photos to your customers. All right, guys, well, that was 15 real estate photography tips to avoid mistakes. If you're interested in learning more about the real estate photography business, you can check out our free training. The link is in the description. That's going to do it for this video. Reach out if you have any questions. We'll see you guys on the next one.